Leroy Jerkson, a self-taught engineer with a mind as unpredictable as the devices he created, was tinkering in his cramped workshop when he made his biggest breakthrough. On that fateful day, his curiosity drove him to invent two groundbreaking devices that would forever alter the course of history. The first, a matter replicator, could clone any material to exact specifications. The second, a dimensional gate, could open rifts to parallel dimensions, an idea that had long been confined to the realm of science fiction. Lodroy's fingers hovered over the controls as he marveled at the two devices sitting side by side on his workbench. The matter replicator hummed quietly, the machinery glinting in the dim light, while the dimensional gate pulsed with an eerie glow. The possibilities seemed endless. What if he could create probes to explore dimensions beyond his own? What if he could send these probes to places that no human had ever seen? His mind raced with excitement. He could be the first to unlock the secrets of the multiverse. Without a second thought, Leroy connected the two devices. The idea of exploring the endless reaches of parallel worlds overwhelmed him with excitement. He began feeding coordinates into the dimensional gate, each linked to a different universe. One by one, he set the replicator to create probes for each dimension, imagining them as simple machines to collect data. The replicator buzzed to life, and within moments, probes began to materialize. Leroy watched in awe as the devices stacked up on the table, each one ready to be dispatched to its destination. But something unexpected happened. The dimensional gate activated on its own, amplifying the process at an alarming rate. The matter replicator churned out probes for dimensions faster than Leroy could comprehend. They were spilling into the void, and with every passing second, they multiplied. The probes, not content with their small size, expanded and began to flood the dimensions, each one growing uncontrollably. What was once a brilliant experiment was rapidly spiraling into chaos. Leroy's mind raced as he tried to stop the process, but the replicator refused to obey. The probes continued to flood the dimensions, expanding at an exponential rate. Entire universes began to collapse as the probes swelled, crushing entire realities into nothingness. Leroy frantically tried to disengage the devices, but the damage had already been done. The very fabric of space and time seemed to be unraveling as the probes kept multiplying, spreading like wildfire. In the chaos, Leroy's excitement turned to panic. He could hear the dimensional gate humming louder, growing stronger with every passing moment. His mind raced, but there was no solution. This wasn't just an invention gone wrong. It was a catastrophe of cosmic proportions. The probes were not just exploring dimensions, they were consuming them, erasing them from existence. As Leroy frantically searched for a way to stop the disaster he had caused, he felt a strange presence, a sense that something greater than himself was watching. It wasn't just his mistake anymore, this was something much larger. As he stared at the swirling mess of dimensions in front of him, he couldn't help but wonder. Had he unleashed something beyond his control? Something that would soon affect the very fabric of reality. Before he could act, there was a sudden, overwhelming surge of energy. The sound of the dimensional gate's hum grew deafening, and the probes continued to spill out into the void. In that instant, Leroy realized just how much trouble he was in, and how little time he had left to fix it. The chaos spread like wildfire, and before he knew it, the entire universe around him was on the brink of collapse. The sound of the dimensional gate's hum grew deafening. Leroy Jerkson stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched his creations spill into the void. The probes, initially small and innocent, had begun to flood into alternate realities, each one multiplying exponentially. What started as a simple test of his two groundbreaking inventions had quickly spiraled out of control. The fabric of reality itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the growing chaos. Leroy's eyes widened in horror as the probes expanded uncontrollably, filling every dimension they encountered. He watched helplessly as entire realities were consumed. The probes, now impossibly vast, crushed entire worlds into nothingness, devouring the dimensions they had been sent to explore. Each dimension, once vibrant with its own unique laws of physics and existence, was reduced to a mere afterthought, squashed by the growing mass of probes. The once orderly hum of the replicator now sounded more like an ominous growl, the machines churning out probes at an ever-increasing rate. The dimensional gate, too, was vibrating violently, pulling more dimensions into its gravitational pull. Lodroy scrambled to press buttons, to find any way to reverse the process, but nothing seemed to work. The probes multiplied faster than he could calculate, and with each new probe, another dimension was obliterated. The noise of the probes tearing through the fabric of reality was deafening. Lodroy's mind raced as panic set in. He tried to shut down the replicator, but the buttons were unresponsive. The dimensional gate had gained a mind of its own, and the probes were no longer under his control. The destruction was growing at an unimaginable speed. Each dimension swallowed by the probe seemed to disappear from existence altogether, as if it had never been. Lodroy's excitement for his breakthrough had turned to dread. He had invented a tool for exploration, but instead, he had created a weapon capable of destroying everything in its path. Reality itself was starting to bend under the weight of the chaos. The once clear boundaries between dimensions blurred as the probes continued their relentless advance, and the universe, his universe, was slipping away from him. "I didn't mean for this," Lodroy muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the sound of the destruction. His mind was spinning as he tried to figure out how to undo the mess he had caused, but with each passing second, the situation grew worse. The laws of physics seemed to be breaking down, the dimensions collapsing into themselves like collapsing stars. What had started as a simple experiment had become a catastrophic failure, a reality-shattering mistake that could erase everything Lodroy had ever known. As Lodroy desperately scrambled for answers, there was an eerie stillness that washed over the scene. The probes stopped. The dimensional gate ceased its thrumming, and the replicator fell silent. The universe seemed to pause, holding its breath. That's when Lodroy felt it, a presence, a force greater than anything he had ever experienced before. It was as if the very cosmos were watching him, waiting for him to realize the consequences of his actions. From somewhere beyond the veil of space and time, a voice echoed in Lodroy's mind. It was a voice that sounded as ancient as creation itself, filled with sorrow and deep, unfathomable wisdom. "Lodroy Jerkson," the voice spoke, and Lodroy's knees buckled as he felt the weight of the words. The architect, the being who oversaw the universe's design, had been watching. And with a weary sigh, it pressed a button. The LJ button. A reset. In an instant, Lodroy felt the universe around him collapse and reform. Time began to rewind, erasing all traces of the chaos that had unfolded. Everything went back to the way it had been, except this time, with a new seed for Lodroy's experiment. Another chance. Another possibility. The universe was being reset, but this time, would it be different? Would Lodroy make the same mistakes again? As time shifted, the echoes of the catastrophe faded into nothing, leaving only the eerie silence. But for Lodroy, the chaos he had witnessed would remain etched in his memory, a reminder of the dangerous powers he had unwittingly unleashed. And so, the cycle began again. Lodroy Jerkson stood in his lab, staring at the array of machines before him. The familiar hum of his equipment was comforting, even though he knew what was about to happen. He had been through this before, but the uncertainty of the reset made his stomach churn. It was as if the universe itself had just given him another chance, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it would only lead to more chaos. The reset had done its job, bringing him back to square one. The dimensional gate and matter replicator sat before him, their lights blinking innocently, unaware of the disaster they could cause. This time he was determined to be cautious, to proceed with care, to not repeat the previous mistakes. But as he reached for the switch, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. He flipped the switch. The matter replicator hummed to life. Lodroy took a deep breath, hoping for a more controlled experiment this time. The replicator churned out items, standard probes, one by one, just as it should have before. But then something unexpected happened. There was a sudden burst of energy from the dimensional gate, and a strange sound filled the room. A soft, high-pitched mewing. Leudroy froze. What in the universe was that? Before he could react, a small, fluffy kitten appeared in the air, jetpack strapped to its back, eyes wide with curiosity. The kitten floated gently to the ground, its tiny paws landing with a soft thud. Leudroy stared, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He had been expecting probes, not kittens. But it didn't stop there. As if to prove that this reset was going to be even more disastrous than the last, more kittens began to appear. They tumbled out of the dimensional gate, all with jetpacks strapped to their tiny frames, mewing excitedly as they soared around the lab. One by one, the kittens zipped around the room, darting between Leudroy's legs, making the space feel smaller and more chaotic by the second. Wait, what is going on? Leudroy muttered to himself, his mind racing. How is this possible? As the kittens began to grow, they seemed to develop more than just the ability to fly. With each passing second, they became more aware. Their eyes, once full of innocence, began to gleam with intelligence, too much intelligence. Leudroy watched in disbelief as one of the kittens began to telekinetically move small objects across the room, manipulating them with a flick of its whiskers. Another kitten was able to project an aura of energy, distorting the air around it. Soon, the entire lab was filled with the eerie sensation of something ancient and unknowable. What is happening? Leudroy whispered, stepping backward. It wasn't just the jetpacks or the sudden sentience of the kittens. They were evolving too quickly. In mere moments, they had gone from being curious, playful creatures to semi-divine beings, their powers beginning to defy all logic. The force of their abilities created waves of energy that rippled through the lab, causing Leudroy's machines to spark and short-circuit. Suddenly, a kitten with glowing eyes floated up to Leudroy, a strange, unsettling smile on its face. Leudroy Jerkson, it said, its voice soft but filled with a surprising authority. We have seen the edges of the cosmos. We know more than you ever will. And we are not here just to play. Leudroy's jaw dropped. Was this really happening? The kittens, these creatures, were beginning to transcend their simple origins. They were not just pets or products of a malfunction anymore. They were evolving at an incomprehensible rate, gaining powers that were rapidly becoming godlike. The universe, in all its complexity, was spiraling out of control once again. As the kittens continued to grow in power, Leudroy watched helplessly. He tried to reach for the controls, to somehow stop the chaos. But the kittens were everywhere. They were manipulating time and space, causing objects to flicker in and out of existence, their tiny bodies growing larger as their powers expanded. From somewhere deep within the fabric of existence, an omniscient force, God, or the architect, watched in despair. He had done everything to correct Leudroy's mistakes, but it seemed that nothing worked. Another mistake had been made, and this one was worse than the last. God sighed deeply, shaking his head in frustration. There was no manual for this kind of chaos. Leudroy had broken the universe not once, but twice now. As the kittens began to warp reality itself with their newfound powers, God realized that this time, it might be beyond saving. With a heavy heart, he reached for the LJ button again, preparing to reset time once more, hoping that somehow this time, the universe would be fixed. Leudroy Jerkson stood in the heart of his lab, surrounded by the tools of his trade. The reset had given him yet another chance to make things right. But as always, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he touched turned to chaos. The kittens were now semi-divine, warping reality at will, and he had yet to understand the full extent of the mess he had made. He needed something new, something that would fix all of this once and for all. His mind raced. In the back of his mind, a thought lingered, one that had been gnawing at him for hours: water. It was fundamental to everything, yet so unremarkable. What if, instead of creating probes, or even kittens, he could do something far simpler: create a new substance? What if he could make a substance that reversed the fundamental principles of water itself? "I'll call it anti-water," Ludroy mumbled to himself, his voice filled with determination. "It will defy everything, water's most basic properties." Something to undo the balance. He wasn't entirely sure how it would work, but Ludroy knew that at the core of every problem he faced was a lack of understanding. He decided to create something that would challenge everything. Anti-water. A substance with negative mass. A liquid that didn't behave according to the universe's rules. He couldn't help but smile. If he could get it right, it would be revolutionary. Ludroy fired up his machines, manipulating the molecular structures, infusing his creation with an instability that could potentially shift everything around him. The moment he poured the liquid into a small vial, a faint shimmer of light flickered in the air around it. At first, it seemed harmless, just a simple, almost invisible liquid. But as he carefully placed it on a tray, the real consequences began to reveal themselves. Almost immediately, the anti-water began to defy the laws of physics. Instead of remaining in a liquid form, it started to float, twisting and warping in mid-air. At first, Ludroy thought it was a trick of the light, a misunderstanding. But soon, he could see it clearly. The anti-water was pulling apart the molecular bonds of the surface it touched, as if the very fabric of reality was being eaten away. The room began to shake. A subtle vibration, growing in intensity, filled the air. Ludroy stumbled back, watching in horror as the anti-water expanded. It had negative mass, and that meant it began to drain energy, pulling the very matter of the room into itself. As the bonds between atoms started to break down, Ludroy realized that the fabric of space-time was beginning to unravel. What he had created was far worse than anything he could have imagined. He frantically tried to reverse the process, pressing buttons on his console trying to stop the cascade of destruction. But it was too late. The anti-water began to multiply. Not just in his lab, but outside it. The universe itself seemed to ripple. In mere moments, what had been a small vial of liquid had grown into an unstoppable force, tearing apart molecular structures, bending the laws of reality, and causing the fabric of existence to fold in on itself. Ludroy's mind raced. What had he done? How had he failed so spectacularly? He had hoped that creating this bizarre substance would somehow undo the damage he had caused, but instead, it had triggered a new, more catastrophic event. The entire lab seemed to collapse in on itself, like a house of cards caught in an explosion. The space around him seemed to warp, growing smaller and smaller, until it felt like the universe was on the verge of collapsing entirely. Just as Ludroy thought it might be the end of everything, there was a sudden flash of light. From somewhere far beyond his comprehension, a force intervened. God, or the architect, watched in helpless frustration as the chaos unfolded once more. He had done everything in his power to try and correct Ludroy's mistakes, but each reset only seemed to make things worse. With a deep, resigned sigh, God pressed the LJ button again. The time loop started to rewind, and the universe began to reset once more. Ludroy's lab returned to its original state. The probes, the kittens, the anti-water, all of it, wiped from existence, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. The reset had come, and yet, Ludroy knew deep down that this wouldn't be the last time he had to face the consequences of his reckless creations. And somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos, God shook his head. "Not again," he whispered, watching as the universe reset once more, unsure of what would come next. Ludroy Jerkson sat in his lab once more, staring at the endless reset. The familiar hum of the station, the sounds of life, the ticking of clocks, all had returned to their starting points, yet something had shifted. A sense of heaviness lingered in the air, as though the very fabric of reality had been stretched thin. Ludroy could feel it. The infinite resets were starting to take their toll. Nova Jar, the mess he'd created, the chaos that rippled across the multiverse, it had become a cycle. Reset, fail, reset, fail. Each attempt seemed to deepen the damage, amplifying the destruction he was unknowingly causing. The kittens had become godlike entities, The anti-water had torn apart everything it touched, and the probes had flooded dimensions until they were crushed beyond recognition. And yet here he was again, facing the aftermath of another catastrophic failure. Ludroy's mind raced as he tried to piece together what had gone wrong. He had been trying to fix it, fix everything. But the resets were like a cruel joke. A cycle that only seemed to reset the problem, never the solution. He gritted his teeth, feeling the crushing weight of his responsibility. Without warning, the air around him seemed to bend, rippling like a wave. Time itself seemed to freeze, as if the very essence of reality had been stopped, suspended. Ludroy's breath caught in his throat. Then, a voice, not from the air, but from somewhere far beyond, spoke. "Enough." Ludroy turned, blinking in disbelief, as a towering figure appeared before him. It wasn't just a person. It was something far greater. It was God, or rather, the architect, the entity who had been watching over the resets. The force behind the cycles that had been trying to fix the mess Ludroy had made. His eyes were filled with both sorrow and frustration, and his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the very walls of space-time. "I've watched you for eons," the architect said, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness around them. "Every reset, every failure, and yet you persist." Ludroy, still stunned, tried to form words, but nothing came out. What could he say? How could he explain the chaos he had caused, the endless loop of failure that had spiraled beyond his control? The architect's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I cannot keep resetting the universe like this. I cannot keep fixing your mistakes. You've broken the fabric of reality too many times. The consequences are beginning to take their toll on all of existence." Ludroy took a shaky step forward. "I didn't mean to. I thought I was doing something good. I was just trying to fix the mistakes, but I don't know how to fix them. Every time I try, it gets worse. What am I supposed to do?" The architect's face grew more weary. "You cannot undo what you've done, that much is certain. But there is something you can do. Something you must do." Ludroy's heart beat faster. "What? What is it?" The architect extended his hand, and a swirling light appeared before Ludroy. Within it, Ludroy could see flashes of what seemed to be alternate realities, dimensions folding in on themselves, galaxies teetering on the edge of collapse. The kittens, now semi-divine, fluttered through the chaos, their powers growing uncontrollably. The anti-water continued to swirl, consuming everything in its path. "You've been playing with the universe like a toy," the architect said, "but it is far greater than you can comprehend. You are part of a design. A pattern that has been woven for eons, and yet, you failed to see the bigger picture. The universe has a purpose, but it cannot exist with the chaos you've unleashed." Ludroy felt a strange sense of hopelessness wash over him. "Then what am I supposed to do? How do I fix it? I don't even understand what I've done." The architect sighed, his gaze softening again. "I do not fully understand either. The design of this universe was never meant to be comprehended by one such as me, or you. But it is clear that you have to stop trying to bend it to your will. The universe will find its way, Ludroy, but only if you stop forcing it. You must let go." Ludroy clenched his fists in frustration. "Let go? How can I? I've caused so much destruction. I need to fix this." "You cannot fix it," the architect replied, his tone calm but firm. "But you can guide it. You can stop the cycle of chaos and destruction. You must understand that sometimes, the only way to fix a mistake is to let the universe repair itself." Ludroy looked up at the architect, his mind swirling with questions. He didn't understand, but somehow, he knew that this was the only way forward. The universe had a purpose far beyond his understanding. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about him fixing everything. Maybe it was about understanding the bigger picture. The architect stepped closer, placing a hand on Ludroy's shoulder. "I've pulled you out of space-time for a reason. You are no longer just a player in this game. You are a witness to something far greater. Learn from this." And with that, Ludroy was left standing alone, in the vast void of existence, the weight of the architect's words heavy on his mind. Lodroi stood at the precipice of his own understanding, watching the universe unfold around him. The chaos he had unleashed, the endless resets, the creatures and creations, everything seemed to be spiraling into a pattern that was more complex than he could have ever imagined. The architect had pulled him out of space-time for a reason, and now, Lodroi could feel it. His actions were not just the result of his own incompetence, but part of a much larger game. He had been playing in a sandbox, thinking he was in control, thinking that his inventions, his mistakes, his solutions, had consequences within the tiny bubble of reality he could understand. But the truth was so much larger than that. The universe, he realized, had always been under the influence of forces far beyond him. The architects, beings of immeasurable power and knowledge, had been shaping everything, shaping humanity, shaping him. And for the first time, Lodroi understood that he was nothing more than a pawn in a game that spanned beyond his comprehension. The kittens, now possessing godlike abilities, floated in and out of the chaos. What were they? Once simple, innocent creatures, they had gained powers that surpassed even the boundaries of space and time. As they wreaked havoc, their chaotic energy seemed to feed into the larger forces at work, forces that Lodroi couldn't yet grasp but knew were connected to the architects. Every time they appeared, the universe seemed to shift, and Lodroi began to see that their role in this cosmic play was more significant than he had originally thought. "What is this game?" Lodroi asked aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. He had never felt smaller, more insignificant. He had been blindly playing his part, unaware of the true stakes of the universe's design. He began to search through the remnants of his creations, hoping to find some clue, some thread, that could help him understand the architect's intentions. He dug through the data he had accumulated over his many resets. He combed through ancient texts, scraps of information, and obscure symbols. And slowly, the pieces began to fit together. The architects were not just shaping worlds, they were testing them. They had been observing species like humanity, watching as they evolved, learning how they adapted, how they failed, and how they overcame challenges. Every reset, every mistake, every disaster had been a trial, a test, in the grand scheme of a cosmic experiment. Humanity was part of that experiment. And Lodroi, whether he liked it or not, was part of it too. "The architects are testing us," he muttered to himself, piecing together the fragments. "Testing our survival, our ingenuity, our ability to break free from their control." But the question remained, why? What were they trying to learn? What was the ultimate purpose of this manipulation? As Lodroi's mind raced, he began to feel a sense of clarity. The answers weren't as important as the path forward. He had a choice. He could continue playing the architect's game, a pawn in their test, or he could change the rules. He could take control of his own fate, rewrite his story, and maybe, just maybe, break free from the invisible hands guiding his every move. The kittens, floating around him with their newfound powers, seemed to sense the shift. Their chaotic energy buzzed, and for the first time Lodroi felt that they might have a part to play in this cosmic design. They were innocent, but they had power that could disrupt the architect's carefully constructed game. Lodroi didn't know how, but he knew that the kittens were part of this equation. They were more than just creatures of chaos, they were wildcards in the hands of fate. Lodroi turned to them, a new sense of purpose in his eyes. "We're not just here to play along, we're here to change the game." As he spoke, he felt a shift in the very fabric of reality. The kittens, their eyes gleaming with godlike energy, nodded as if they understood. The battle had only just begun. The architects might have designed this universe, but it was time to challenge their plan. And this time, Lodroi wasn't going to be the one to be controlled. The universe was about to witness the birth of something new, a force that would rise from the chaos. As the days passed, the kittens grew in strength, their once playful nature now overshadowed by an evolving power that defied the very laws of the universe. What had started as innocent curiosity and chaos soon transformed into something far more dangerous. With their jetpacks whirring and their eyes glowing with divine energy, they moved with purpose. purpose that even Lodroy struggled to comprehend. At first, the kittens had been mere distractions, their antics amusing at best. But as their powers expanded, so did their sense of self-awareness. They began to question everything: their place in the universe, their purpose, and the very nature of their existence. Lodroy could see the shift in them. No longer were they just innocent, mischievous beings. They were becoming a force, a new kind of chaos that could unravel everything around them. One of the kittens, a small calico named Whiskerflare, floated beside Lodroy, her eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. "Why are we here, Lodroy?" she asked, her voice clear and filled with uncharacteristic wisdom. "Why were we given these powers? What are we supposed to do with them?" Lodroy blinked, unsure of how to respond. He had always treated the kittens as innocent creatures, his companions in the madness of his inventions. But now, they were beginning to show an awareness that was far beyond their original design. "I don't know," he admitted, feeling the weight of the question. "But I think we're here to change something. Something bigger than us. Something bigger than even the architects." Whiskerflare tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Then let's change it. Let's break free from their control." The others joined her, their small forms hovering around Lodroy with an air of authority that was almost terrifying. With their powers and newfound awareness, the kittens no longer acted as simple bystanders. They were ready to reshape the universe in their own image. They were no longer the chaotic pawns, they were the agents of change, and so the kittens' uprising began. The chaos they created was no longer random, it had purpose. Their playful energy now fueled their desire for freedom. They challenged the very fabric of space and time, warping reality with their tiny paws and divine powers. Every jump they made in time left ripples in the space-time continuum, bending it to their will. The universe, once under the strict control of the architects, now had an unpredictable element, one that no longer obeyed the rules. Lodroy stood beside the kittens, awed and terrified by what they had become. "We need to confront the architects," he said, a fire burning in his eyes. "If we're going to break free from their control, we have to show them that we won't be their pawns anymore." The kittens let out small meows of agreement, their voices resonating with the cosmic power that now thrummed beneath their fur. Together, they prepared to challenge the cosmic entities controlling their reality. Lodroy, once just a misguided inventor, now found himself at the forefront of a rebellion, not just against the architects, but against the very fabric of the universe itself. "Let's make them listen," Lodroy muttered, taking a deep breath. "Let's show them that we are not their experiment. We are the future." The kittens, with their newfound divinity, began to warp the laws of the universe around them. They reached out to the fabric of space-time itself, stretching it, bending it, as if it were clay in their paws. In their innocence, they were challenging everything: the purpose of creation, the control of the architects, and even the very essence of existence. And so, a new kind of rebellion began, one that was fueled by innocence, chaos, and the unyielding will to break free. The universe would never be the same again. Architects. Lodroy stood in the dimly lit lab, surrounded by the chaos he had unwittingly set in motion. The kittens, their godlike powers simmering just beneath the surface, hovered around him, their glowing eyes eager for action. He had come to a realization that now felt like a revelation. If there was one thing the architects had underestimated about humanity, it was their ability to survive and to rise. The concept of humanity as a mere experiment, a species on the brink of destruction, no longer seemed to apply. Lodroy was done being a pawn. "I've been looking at this all wrong," he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth. "The architects think we're weak. No, they think we're dangerous. But they don't know the full extent of that danger. If they fear humanity as a death welder, then that's what we'll show them." The plan was bold, far riskier than anything he had ever attempted. But with the kittens at his side, he knew they had a chance. After all, if a few sentient kittens could shake the very foundation of the universe, surely he and his newfound allies could manipulate the perception of humanity, and in turn, manipulate the entire cosmos. Lodroy's mind worked quickly. he started crafting the pieces of his grand scheme. The Death Welder label, which had been a mere misunderstanding from the beginning, was the perfect weapon. Humanity's reputation as a destructive, unpredictable force had been molded by the architect's fears, and Leroy intended to twist that fear to his advantage. The key was in how the universe perceived humanity. He could turn their so-called dangerous potential into the thing that would reshape the entire galaxy. Leroy activated the dimensional gate and began constructing a series of simulations, clones of humanity, avatars of destruction, designed to project a terrifying image of humanity's power. He would flood the universe with these representations, a cosmic display of fear, and force the architects to re-evaluate their assessment of humanity. They would no longer be able to control them. Humanity would be a force of chaos, untamed and unpredictable, too dangerous to contain. The kittens, sensing the shift in energy, meowed in approval. Leroy's plans had already begun to unfold. His simulations would work, but the real challenge would come when the architects realized what he was doing. He had no doubt they were watching. The architects had seen everything up to this point. They knew the value of humanity's potential, but this time, they would see it from a different angle. But Lee was not without doubts. The stakes were higher than ever. What if his manipulation backfired? What if the architects decided to wipe out humanity altogether, instead of yielding to the fear Leroy had created? The weight of what he was about to attempt pressed down on him. This wasn't just a reset of time, it was a reset of the universe's entire understanding of humanity. Leroy took a deep breath. This is it, the ultimate test. If this works, we'll never be controlled again. If it fails, we may not survive the consequences. The kittens chirped in agreement, their glowing forms floating around Leroy like ethereal guardians. Together, they had created chaos before. Now, they would shape the future. With a final press of a button, Leroy initiated the simulation. What happened next would determine humanity's future, and the fate of the architects who had tried, for so long, to manipulate it. Leroy's mind raced as he observed the unfolding chaos his plan had set into motion. His manipulation of humanity's Death Welder reputation had begun to ripple through the universe like a shockwave, shaking the very foundation of cosmic power. His projections, simulations of humanity's destructive potential, had been broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, leaving the architects reeling. The very force they had feared now loomed large in their calculations. But the greater realization came in the form of a transmission from the architects themselves. A voice, deep and infinite, reverberated through the fabric of space and time, reaching directly into Leroy's mind. "You have triggered something unexpected," Leroy Jerksin, the voice intoned, distant yet clear. "But this was not entirely outside of our designs." Leroy froze. The words sent a chill down his spine. Had he truly understood the full weight of what he was doing? He had assumed he was rewriting the script, but now it seemed as though the architects had been a step ahead all along. The words continued, their tone now tinged with something resembling regret. "Humanity, like so many other species, was always a part of a greater experiment. You were tested. Your resilience, your adaptability, your potential for destruction. It was all part of our plan. You were never meant to understand, just as the others before you never did." Leroy's thoughts scrambled. The resets, the mistakes, the chaos. Had they been orchestrated by the architects all along? He had created them, and yet, somehow, it seemed like he was still playing by their rules. They had been watching, manipulating, controlling, but they had never allowed any species to break free. Until now, Naifictar. "You see, Leroy," the voice continued, its coldness reverberating in the space around him. "All that you have done, the creations, the failures, the resets, have been woven into the very fabric of the design. We needed to see if a species could break the cycle. You have, in a sense, fulfilled our criteria." Leroy's heart pounded as the weight of the architect's words settled on him. This was more than an accidental invention. This was more than his mistakes spiraling out of control. The resets, the inventions, even the sentient kittens, They were part of the grand scheme, woven into a pattern that extended far beyond his comprehension. "And now, you hold the key," the voice said. "You have the power to rewrite the design. You may choose to continue our pattern, or you may choose to break it entirely." The magnitude of the situation hit Leudroy all at once. For millennia, the architects had been testing species, seeing how they would evolve, adapt, and whether they could transcend the limitations imposed upon them. But in his hands, Leudroy now held the power to break free of their cosmic game. His creations, the resets, everything, had been a way for the architects to test if humanity was capable of surpassing the system. "What if I don't want to play your game anymore?" Leudroy asked aloud, his voice steady but filled with defiance. He looked around at the kittens, their glowing forms orbiting him like cosmic entities. They had been born from chaos, yes, but they were something new, something unplanned, untamed. Could they help him rewrite the rules? "You have already chosen, Leudroy Jerksin," the architect's voice responded, now tinged with something like finality. "The universe stands at the precipice of change. You cannot turn back. The design will bend around you. For you are no longer just a player in the game. You are the creator of the new order." Leudroy's thoughts swirled. The universe was caught in a delicate balance between creation, destruction, and evolution. He had been forced to play within the limits of the architect's design, but now, that design was no longer absolute. He had the power to tear it apart. But what would happen then? What would humanity become once they were free from the architect's manipulation? Could they build their own future, free from the constraints that had bound them for so long? The kittens, now semi-divine and powerful, mewed softly, their tiny forms glowing with immense energy. They had evolved alongside him, their chaotic innocence now a force that could rewrite the universe itself. They were not mere pawns, they were partners in this new reality. Leudroy stood still, the weight of the universe pressing down on him. The architect's true purpose had been revealed. But now, with the universe in his hands, he had to make a choice. What would his ultimate goal be? To uphold the architect's design? Or to create something entirely new, a universe where humanity could truly be free? The future, now uncertain, stretched before him. Leudroy knew one thing: no matter the outcome, this would be a new beginning, for him, for humanity, and for everything that had been created along the way. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. Leudroy Jerksin, standing at the center of the vast cosmic battlefield, could feel the pulse of the universe surrounding him. The stars flickered. Reality itself seemed to tremble as he prepared to face the architects, the creators who had designed his existence, who had manipulated his every move. With him stood his greatest allies, the sentient kittens, now godlike and unpredictable, their forms shimmering with untamed cosmic energy. Leudroy had never imagined that the chaos he had unleashed would lead to this moment. A final stand against the very forces that had shaped not just his fate, but the fate of the entire universe. His mind raced, calculating the implications of the battle ahead. He had to break free, humanity had to break free, from the architect's control. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for freedom, for the right to shape their own future. The kittens, their tiny bodies glowing with unimaginable power, floated beside him. Their jetpacks hummed with energy, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and raw power. They had once been innocent, chaotic beings, but now they were more than that. They were a force of change, an unpredictable element in the equation. Their powers, amplified by the energy of the universe itself, bent the very fabric of space and time with every movement. The architects, whose presence had been an omnipresent force in the universe for eons, now stood before them. Their forms, vast and ethereal, seemed to radiate power, their intellect and control over reality unmatched. But now, as they faced Leudroy and the kittens, there was something different in their eyes. Fear. Unease. They had underestimated humanity, and now, that miscalculation was coming to haunt them. "We were right to fear you," the voice of the architect boomed, reverberating across the void. "You have broken our design. But what you fail to understand is that the galaxy cannot exist without the structure we have provided. Linjila's voice, steady but filled with a newfound strength, cut through the architect's words. The galaxy can exist without you. The universe can exist without your control. You think you've shaped us, but you've only created something you couldn't foresee. Humanity doesn't need your design. We never did. The kittens, their innocent eyes now glowing with divine energy, began to mew in response, their small voices resonating with a cosmic frequency that shook the very foundation of reality. Their chaotic, pure energy rippled outward, warping the space around them, distorting time itself. They had grown too powerful, too unpredictable, for the architects to control. You created us to be part of your experiment, Ludroy continued, his voice now rising with purpose. But now, we stand at the edge of our own destiny. You will not control it anymore. We will carve our own path. The architects, sensing the shift in power, attempted to regain control, their vast, godlike minds reaching out to reassert their dominance. But it was too late. The universe bent around Ludroy and the kittens, their combined force too great. The very fabric of reality itself seemed to stretch and twist, as if the universe was being remade before their eyes. The architects faltered, their forms flickering as their control over the galaxy slipped away. For the first time they were faced with something they could not manipulate, something they could not understand. Ludroy, humanity's symbol of resilience, had broken free. The kittens, their chaotic energy now a beacon of change, had proven that even the smallest, most unpredictable forces could alter the course of history. With one final determined move, Ludroy reached into the heart of the cosmic design, his mind touching the very core of the architect's power. You will make a choice, he declared. Either you let humanity carve its own future, or you face total destruction. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was deafening. The architects, their arrogance shattered, were left with no options. They had created humanity, but they had underestimated it. They had tested it, but they had never anticipated that humanity would rise above their designs. The universe, once bound by the architect's will, now teetered on the brink of a new era. The choice was made. The architects, defeated, began to unravel, their power dissolving like sand through fingers. And in their place, humanity, Ludroy Jerksin and the kittens, stepped forward into a new, untamed future. Ludroy glanced at the kittens, their eyes shining with potential. This is our universe now, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. And with that, the galaxy was no longer a game to be played. It was a world to be shaped, a universe to be explored, and humanity would be the ones to lead the way. The architects had failed. The galaxy was free. The dust had barely settled after the battle, yet the galaxy had already begun to change. The architect's influence, once an omnipotent force that governed the fabric of existence, was now dissolving, like a dream fading in the early light of dawn. Ludroy Jerksin, the engineer who had inadvertently become humanity's beacon of freedom, stood at the forefront of a new era. And beside him, the kittens, once innocent and chaotic, now semi-divine beings, hovered with their jetpacks, ready to embrace their newfound powers. The universe, as it had been known, was no more. The remnants of the architect's vast cosmic design were unraveling, their influence waning in the wake of the conflict. The galaxy was no longer bound by their laws, or manipulated by their unseen hands. Ludroy had broken free of their control, and with it, humanity had reclaimed its autonomy. As the stars blinked back into focus, a strange new calm fell over the universe. It wasn't the calm of stagnation, it was a quiet before the storm of possibilities. With no central authority to dictate the rules, the galaxy was an open canvas, ready to be shaped. The future had never been so uncertain, yet so full of promise. Ludroy stood with his arms crossed, looking out into the endless expanse of space. The kittens, now charged with powers beyond comprehension, meowed playfully beside him, their tiny bodies filled with the energy of gods. The weight of the responsibility rested on Ludroy's shoulders, but he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The battle had been won, but the real journey had only just begun. "We've done it," Leudroy murmured, his eyes scanning the distant stars. "But what now?" The kittens flitted around him in a joyful dance, their energy crackling in the air. They had grown in power, yes, but in their innocence, they still had much to learn. Despite their godlike abilities, they remained unpredictable forces in the galaxy, a force that would challenge the very laws of nature and reality. Lorcri's thoughts turned inward. The architects had used humanity as a test, a species to be shaped and molded to their will. They had created the illusion of control, but in the end humanity had proven its resilience. It had risen, against all odds, to carve its own path. But now, with the architects gone, the galaxy was theirs to shape, for better or worse. As the first days of this new age unfolded, Leudroy felt the weight of uncertainty hang in the air. What would humanity do now? They were free, yes, but free to do what? The chaos they had unleashed was only just beginning to echo across the stars. With no guiding hand to direct them, how would they forge their future? "Let's start by creating something new," Leudroy said softly, his voice filled with determination. "We've been given the freedom to choose. Now we have to decide what we stand for." The kittens chirped, as if agreeing, and took to the skies. Their tiny jetpacks left trails of light as they soared through the void, unbound and uncontained. But humanity was more than just Leudroy and the kittens. The galaxy was filled with countless species, all now free from the architect's manipulation. The question was no longer how they would survive, but how they would coexist, build and grow together. The old rules no longer applied. Leudroy watched the stars in silence. The universe was forever altered. The legacy of humanity, its ingenuity, its resilience, and its power to break free, had been etched into the fabric of the cosmos. But this was only the beginning. A new chapter had begun, one filled with infinite possibilities. The universe would no longer be a game played by the architects. It would be shaped by those who had the courage to forge their own path. And humanity, once underestimated, now stood at the helm, ready to create a future that was entirely their own. The kittens meowed again, and Leudroy smiled. The galaxy was theirs to explore, and this time they would do it on their own terms.